Hello everyone, I'm astronaut Charlie Duke. I was lunar module pilot on Apollo 16 in 1972.
Okay, let me take a picture for you, Charlie. Where at? How much? That's okay. Look at this.
Awesome. Let's start with this. I'd love to know a little bit about your time in the Air Force before you were at NASA and how your time at NASA sort of first began.
I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1957, and back then there was no Air Force Academy, so you could volunteer to go into the Air Force, and I wanted to fly airplanes, and I qualified for Air Force flight training, but not for Navy flight training for some reason I don't want to go into, but anyway, went into the Air Force and started flight training in September of 1957, and the day after I soloed, Sputnik went up, and the beginning of the space age, and wow, and I thought, and 2 years later, I got my wings and finished my training. I was on my way to Germany for a 3-year assignment at Ramstein, and that was in 1959, and that NASA was formed then, and the first group of astronauts were formed, and of course I'm too young, too inexperienced even to think about being an astronaut.
Yeah.
I thought it would be, for these guys who were test pilots, I thought it would be great. So I spent 3 years over in Germany, and in April of 1961, Yuri Gagarin went up and was the first human being. A couple of weeks later, in first part of May, Alan Shepard went up, and a couple of weeks later, Kennedy announced we're going to go to the moon. And it wasn't a big speech that he finally made a year later in Rice University Stadium, but it was a commitment. And we laughed at him, so 15 minutes in space, and he's going to the moon 8 years and 2 months. Well, I didn't think much more about it, and then I went back, made a decision to go back to graduate school. The Air Force sent me to MIT. And the second year at MIT, I was doing my graduate thesis, and the instrumentation lab at MIT had the contract to build the Apollo guidance and navigation system. So I was working on this system as part of data taking. They make sure that what they built somebody could actually operate, and so they needed a pilot. So me and I and my another friend did that work. And while we were doing that, we had visits from some of the astronauts, the second group and the third group, and I'd never met anybody that was so enthusiastic about their job as these guys. And I said, well, how did I get that job? Wanted to go back to flying. He said, well, finish your degree and then go to test pilot school and you might have a chance. So I followed their advice and got selected for test pilot school when I graduated in 1964 with my master's in aeronautical engineering, and went to test pilot school and did really well there. And the next summer of '65, I graduated and went on the staff of test pilot school, working for Colonel Chuck Yeager, who was a famous American test pilot. First guy to fly faster than the speed of sound. So I was working for him, and in September of 65, there was an article in the LA Times said NASA's looking for another group of astronauts. So I applied and got selected. And we reported in April of '66. There were 19 of us.
Yeah. What did that selection process look like?
Well, it was fill out your application, and being in the military, you had to send it through channels. So it went from Edwards to Washington, and a crew up there reviewed these applications, and people they thought had a chance, they forwarded them to NASA, and then NASA started reviewing them. And we had, the only thing I remember really exciting about the about the process that went on until April of the next year was two things. Actually, the physical, which was done at Brooks Air Force Base at the School of Aviation Medicine, lasted a whole week. And then we did a interview with senior astronauts and the director of flight crew operations, who was a grounded astronaut, but one of the original 7, Duke Slayton. Mm-hmm. And after that, we just went home and waited, and about a month later, they called me up and said, hey, Charlie, we'd like you to come. You still want the job? I said, you bet. So that was the first part of April, and no, it was probably in March, that early part of, and so we had to report to Houston in April, so we packed up, and I got assigned to NASA, and we drove across the country to Houston and started my career.
Yeah. Were all of you guys, like all of the Apollo 19, were you all selected at the same time? Or
Yeah.
was the original group, okay, so you were all selected together?
All 19 of us were selected. We were the 5th group. And there were Navy, civilians, and Air Force in our group. And Marines, a couple of Marines.
Yeah. And did you guys all start training together immediately?
Yeah, but it was more of a familiarization with NASA, NASA-ese, what the acronyms and this means and that means, and how does NASA operate, and then they started geology training right away within a couple of months. Mm-hmm. And we were picked for Apollo, so if we went to the moon, we were supposed to know what kind of rocks to pick up. So we started just extensive geology training that for me lasted for 6 years until I flew to the moon. And then we were all assigned, after 4 or 5 months, we were all assigned a responsibility in the astronaut office. Stu Roos and I were assigned the task of following the development of the Saturn rockets. So every month we'd fly to Huntsville, Alabama to the Marshall Space Flight Center and sit in on Werner von Braun's management meetings. And then we'd go report back to Houston and give a briefing on the status of the Saturn rockets. So we were busy and exciting.
Were you hoping to be on Apollo 11?
No, I didn't think I had a chance on Apollo 11. There were really some guys they picked for Apollo 11 had experience. It was Armstrong had flown 2 Gemini flights. Buzz Aldrin had experience on Gemini, and Mike Collins had experience on a Gemini flight. But then after that, they started picking. We did have people on the backup crew, and Fred Hayes, and I don't remember who else. But then after that, they started putting in other astronauts who had no experience. So the idea was to get everybody, as many people as possible, to fly, to give the whole astronaut office experience, because you never knew when somebody's going to get killed in a car wreck or an airplane accident. And while right before I got there, we had NASA had 3 guys killed in airplane accidents. And then the fire killed 3 in the spacecraft. And then we had 1 more airplane accident. And then we had an automobile accident. So in a 2-year period, 8 funerals in the astronaut office.
Yeah.
So it was devastating, especially the fire that killed the 3 in the space program, because they had, it just brought everything to a screeching halt in the schedule, And, oh my gosh, how are we going to make it to the moon?
And that was the Apollo 1
time.
Now.
Yeah, it was
fire.
January 1967.
Yeah. Did that make you scared?
No.
At all?
It makes you, it's just like an airplane accident in your squadron. It makes you determined to fix it and to make it good, and we're going to press on and do this thing right.
Yeah, yeah. Did you feel a lot of pressure leading up to your mission? Like once Apollo 11 happened in 1969, like was there more pressure to perform in a certain way? How did you feel leading up to the mission in the months before?
I think we got better at training as it went along because we had more time. The first Apollos, 11, 12, and 14, were all one day on the moon, 24 hours. That's what the lunar module capacity had. So they did one EVA, 6 to 8 hours, and they walked everywhere. And so Apollo, they needed, I think management said, we need a lunar module that can stay at least 3 days. And so they decided to commit to a lunar module for 3 days. And they said, well, we need a car. So they designed a lunar rover. Well, all that stretched out the schedule. And so after Apollo 14, then the last 3 missions, 15, 16, and 17, had a 3-day lunar module, and they had a car they called a lunar rover.
Yeah.
And that revolutionized lunar exploration. And of all the moon rocks that brought back, most of them were brought back on the Apollo 15, 16, and 17. And so that stretched out our schedule. So we ended up training, John and I ended up training from the time we were back up on 13 to flew, it was 2 years. And so, man, I mean, we were at Houston, we did geology all over all over the United States, let me put it that way. And so we were well trained. We'd been back up on Apollo 13, and that was an experience, rescuing those guys. And after the explosion, John and Mattingly and I went into the mission control. We were there for 35 hours working on procedures to get them safely returning to the moon, from the moon. And so it was a big job. We had a spacecraft that was built for 2 guys for 1 day or 3 days, and they'd be, by the time you landed and took off again, you're going to be in there 3 days. So this spacecraft was built for 2 guys for 3 days. Now we got 3 guys for 4 days. How do you make it last? And it turned out that drinking water was one of the critical consumables because we only had a tank of water, and you couldn't make water in the lunar module like you could in the command module. Anyway, they made it back thanks to Mission Control. And I'm going to give a attaboy to Mission Control right now. They saved the day on basically every Apollo flight. Thankfully, they knew what they were doing, and it was a tremendous bunch of guys in Mission Control.
Yeah. So you said you didn't really feel too scared after the Apollo 1 disaster. After Apollo 13, did that make you any more nervous?
No. Accidents, I think, with the personality of test pilots and pilots, when accidents like that happens, you don't wring your hands and say, "Oh no, we're doomed." You just, we'll fix this thing, and we'll get it right. And so the attitude is more of a focus on mourning the crew, of course, and the loss of your buddies, but this is not going to happen again, and we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys feel like some of the most important people in the world at that point?
No, I never thought. I thought, well, astronaut was a unique job, but nobody walked around and said, "Hey, I'm an astronaut."
Yeah. Did you get recognized in public?
No, not back then. Yeah. Now I am, but not back then.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm curious. Let's get into the Apollo 16 mission a little bit. By the way, just a side note, I do sort of know the answer to some of these questions, but obviously, we want to educate the
right,
people
I
watching.
understand.
But so what was the central purpose of the Apollo 16 mission?
It was the first and only landing in the lunar highlands, the mountains of the moon. And they expected to be some unique rocks. Everybody else had landed on the Mare, the dark area of the moon. Now we're almost in the center of the moon as you look at it from Earth, in this bright white area, which was the mountains. And compared to where Neil Armstrong landed on the Mare Tranquillitatis, we were 8,000 feet above him in elevation on the lunar surface. And
Yeah.
so the rocks were different, and we'd never sampled any of these rocks, and then we had a lot of experiments that we had accomplished to put out seismic experiments and measure a lot of stuff we did, and it was very, very successful mission.
Yeah. And y'all were trying to figure out if that area was volcanic, right?
Yeah, they'd given us briefings that your two volcanic areas, and they meet in the valley where you're landing, called the Cayley Plain. And we got there, and there were no volcanics. We started describing these rocks, and so their guess was wrong. But they got very excited because they hadn't gotten any rocks like this from the other guys. So they were very enthusiastic about the rocks we were collecting.
Yeah. Can you explain what the far side of the moon means and why that's so significant?
The far side of the moon is the side that we never see from Earth. The moon rotates around once every 28 days on its axis, but it goes around the Earth once every 28 days. So as it's rotating, it rotates and you always see the same side. So the far side is sometimes it's in daylight. A new moon, it's all in sunlight. But a full moon, it's all in darkness on the backside. So just like day-night on the Earth. So the far side is the far side you never see from Earth. And it's real rough. The parts we saw back there is really rough.
Wow. Yeah. So I think a lot of people maybe don't realize that not only did you guys walk on the moon, but you got to see a part of the moon that nobody else really gets to see. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about the lunar orbit rendezvous process and why it was the most efficient way to land humans on the moon?
The decision was made after study from the ability of the Saturn. How will we do the mission early on? And it was finally decided we'll build this big rocket, and we'll take everything up together. And so we don't have to rendezvous parts in Earth orbit and then get going. Mm-hmm. And so unlike what's going to happen on Artemis, they're doing just the opposite. We had a Saturn that would lift everything up, fully fueled, and take it all to the moon, orbit the moon, and land on the moon, and the rendezvous would be done at the moon when we came back up. And so it was no rendezvous required on the way out or in orbit before you landed. So it was the most efficient way to design Apollo. And we had a rocket, and I think Werner von Braun probably had a big say about how we're going to do this, because they designed this rocket. It was huge, as you know, and biggest rocket ever launched right now. Soon, a space launch system will be bigger, but it was tremendous size.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to just elaborate a little more on what a rendezvous is for an audience member who might not know what that means?
Well, yeah. There was a lot of debate on how we would fly Apollo. Mm-hmm. Would we send up the lunar module by itself and then send a manual and then a command module, and then we would rendezvous in space, in Earth orbit, and we would build up the Apollo rockets and spacecraft by joining together in Earth orbit. That was one possibility, and that's called rendezvous. When you join two together, that would be a rendezvous. And you could have done that in Earth orbit, got it all together, and then take it to the moon. But then you just still had to rendezvous at the moon on the return from the lunar surface. So it was decided if we had a rocket big enough to take everything up, fully fueled, then the easiest way to do it is to fly it all to the moon together, go into lunar orbit, and then separate and let each piece do its job, and then rendezvous, one little rendezvous in orbit, in lunar orbit, then that's it. And so it was a lot simpler flight plan, and was capable because we had a rocket that would lift everything up. We put over 100,000 pounds in lunar orbit with the launch of the Saturn V.
Yeah. So can you explain each of the 3 stages of the Saturn V and how they reached deployed?
Yeah. The first stage, of course, was the biggest. It lifted you off. It had the whole rocket, fully fueled, weighed 6.5 million pounds. That's the whole rocket, and that's the command module, service module, and lunar module. They're sitting up on top of the third stage, and so it was 6.5 million pounds it weighed, and there were 5 engines at the base of it pushing with 7.5 million pounds of thrust, and it was controlled by 4 of the engines moved, gimbaled, to control the trajectory. And so when it lifted off, you're sitting up on the top. This thing was 363 feet tall, and you're sitting up on the top in the command module, and these engines are moving down 360 feet below you. They're moving, and you start to shake from side to side. The noise was nothing. You didn't hear much inside as far as the engine roar, but the vibration was really intense. And to be honest, it got my attention. I said, "What is this shaking so hard?" And but John was very calm, our commander. He "Where go, Houston?" And we lifted off right on the second, but the vibration lasted the whole first stage, and it lasted on our flight 2 minutes and 40 seconds, or 42 seconds, and it burned through 4 million pounds of fuel in 2 minutes and 42 seconds. So, I mean, these engines were huge, and so when it got, and you accelerated, as you burned out your fuel, you accelerated to 4.5 times gravity, which was the maximum acceleration allowed from the other spacecraft. And so you're accelerating along, and you can't see outside because the windows are covered over, and you're just watching the instrument panel and shaking like crazy, and then the engines automatically whoop, shut down, and you go from 4.5 Gs to 0, bang, just like that. So we stiff-armed, we were strapped in, but we stiff-armed the instrument panel because even strapped in, it was going to throw you forward.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then the second stage took us to 100 miles altitude, but not orbital velocity. So it dropped off, it re-entered, and then the third stage accelerated us to orbital velocity at 100 miles altitude. We circled the Earth 1.5 times, and then we burned that engine to accelerate to escape velocity, which was 25,000 miles an hour, and you're on the way to the moon.
Amazing. Now, sorry.
Yeah.
As I understand, not everything went perfectly to plan, both in Earth and lunar orbit later in the mission. Can you explain some of the things that went wrong and how you were able to fix them?
Well, the things were going really well until we left Earth orbit, and we were in Earth orbit like 3 hours, maybe 1.5 revolutions. We left Earth orbit over Australia, and then on the way, we separated lunar module, the command service module, from the top of the third stage, and opened these rose petals just opened up and floated away, and there's the lunar module. And I'm just riding along. I'm copying stuff from Houston, and Mattingly's flying, and John Young is assisting. And he's maneuvering the lunar module around, the command module, to get and extract the lunar module from its launch position. And so I'm copying this stuff all from Houston, and I look out the window, and there's the Earth, moves into my window 20,000 miles away, the whole circle of the Earth. It was breathtaking, of course. We could see the Arctic Circle down across Canada, the U.S., Mexico, Central America, and there were 3 colors: the blue of the ocean, the white of the snow and the clouds, and the brown of the land. And that jewel was just suspended in the blackness of space, and it was breathtaking. So we got a picture of that, and then we docked up, and on our way we went, and 3 days later we arrived at the moon. We had some problems on the way. When we first looked at the lunar module, it looked like we had a fuel leak because these little flakes were floating off into space. And so it was around one of the fuel tanks, and that got our attention. So as soon as we docked up, they wanted to go over and see if we had a fuel leak. And so we went in, John and I went into the lunar module, we powered up, and there was no fuel leak. We don't know what we still didn't know what it was, but there was no fuel leak. So we would go to the moon. And so it was a 3-day trip to the moon, and you had some experiments to do, and you just rode along till you got to lunar orbit. And Mattingly was busy with he's flying the thing and making the small corrections, and you tested out the main engine a little bit, and so it was a very thorough flight plan, and it was designed for 3 days because that was the fuel budget that we had in the command module. You can get to the moon a lot faster, but it takes a lot of gas to slow down, and so we didn't have enough on board. So, but we put 100,000 pounds in, about 100,000 pounds in lunar orbit, and it's a big payload. So then after that, we orbited for a day, and then John and I put our suits on, and we floated into the lunar module and started powering up and get ready for our landing.
Yeah. Going back a little bit, so if it wasn't a gas leak, what were those little particles?
Well, we found out later when we got on the surface, we looked up, and some thermal paint had been applied incorrectly, and it was flakes of paint floating off, peeling off and floating off into space.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. What was going through your head when you guys were orbiting the moon and you had to wait 6 hours longer than was originally planned to go out onto the moon's surface?
We were on the backside of the moon an hour before we were scheduled to land, and the command module was in the same orbit as we were in. Well, he had to change his orbit from 60 miles on the backside to 60 miles on the front side. That required a main engine to burn, and there was something wrong with the engine. And so he told John. John said, "Don't burn." When he said that meant we were going to land the next hour. And we had a great spacecraft. It was his is broken. And so I said, "Oh no, you can imagine if your heart could sink."
Sorry.
That's all right. You can imagine if your heart could sink in zero gravity to the bottom of your boots. It did to me. 3 years we trained, ready to go, And 1 hour before, 8 miles below me was my landing site, and they was about ready to tell me to come home. That would have been a bitter pill.
Yeah.
But Mission Control saved the day. It took them 4 hours to figure out what was wrong. They couldn't fix it, but they gave a workaround to Mattingly. And so as we disappeared around the backside 4 hours later, they said, "Your go on the next rev." And he made a good burn on the backside, and the next time around, now 6 hours late, we started our engine and down we went. So, I mean, when they said "your go for the landing on the next rev," you know, it was just exhilarating.
Yeah.
And our hearts came up into our chest again from the bottom of our boots. Yeah.
Yeah. How were you guys able to find and make sure you were at the correct landing site?
That was Mission Control's job. Yeah. We didn't have that navigation capability on board. We had a set of maps so that when we went across the surface, we could in an orbit, let's say at 1 hour and 44 minutes, you're supposed to be over this point. And you could look at the map and see if you were ahead or behind. And but it was very rough, and Mission Control had to get you into the right spot. And so they navigated you and gave you a decent time and a decent profile that was in your computer, and you got in position, and on the time you were supposed to start the engine, you just armed the engine, and the computer took over. It ignited the engine, and you started your descent.
Yeah, it's crazy that the computers were powerful enough to know sort of where to go. I mean, there was no GPS, right?
No, but Mission Control was providing all that information. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were controlling it.
Yeah, no, they weren't controlling
Okay.
it. They were providing the data into your descent programs. Okay, start your engine here, and you're landing there, and they had the coordinates all in the computer, and they uploaded all that information into your computer, and so those programs were there. It was P62, P63, and P64. The final landing program was P64, and you didn't get to that point until you were 7,000 feet above, and by this you're coming in with the windows facing out into space. You can't even see the moon. And at 7,000 feet, the engine, the computer pitches you over, and you can see the moon for the first time. And so now that's 7,000 feet. Your P64, the landing program, and we recognized everything that we'd studied, and we were right on track. And that was them and their navigation, and they're providing us. We didn't do anything. We just put it into the computer, and the computer flew us to that point. And then John started flying manually. Not all the way, but he took over slowly. And the computer would tell you what was called LPD. And LPD was the landing point designation. And it would say, it would give you LPD 45. Well, on John's window, he had an outer window and an inner window, and they had ladders on them. And they were numbered 35, 40, 45, whatever they were. And if I said LPD 45, he would land up the 245s, and that's where he's going to land if he doesn't do anything. Well, he didn't like it, so he starts redesignating. And the landing LPD the computer sensed that, and it would change, give him a new landing spot. And he did that 3 times before he figured out a good one where he wanted to land.
Yeah.
The problem that we had was our landing site had been photographed from Apollo 14, and they were good photographs, but the resolution of the photographs was 45 feet, and you couldn't see objects less than 45 feet in these photographs.
Yeah.
So as we pitched down and started coming down, there were a lot of craters in our landing area less than 45 feet, so we started seeing all these extra craters. But John was able to land, and I talked him down. I was giving him the rate of descent, lateral velocity, forward velocity, and fuel states and stuff like that. And finally, about 500 feet, he's fully manual control.
Yeah.
And flying a good job. And so I talked him all down. I was going to handle any emergencies that we might have, but we didn't have any.
Yeah. When you're landing on the moon, as long as I know when you're landing in a plane, like, you know, above Earth, it's sometimes hard to tell how close you are to the ground. Were you able to tell, like, obviously you sort of knew how many feet you were from the moon, but could you sort of, like, how did it look sort of when you were getting closer?
You started seeing a lot more detail, but you really depended on your landing radar. It gave you altitude above the moon. Mm-hmm. And so at about 30 feet above the moon, the engine exhaust started blowing moon dust everywhere. So it was like landing through a fog. Mm-hmm. You're looking into the moon dust, but as you come down, and it's being blown everywhere. But the landing radar was really accurate. And at about 20 feet, John levels off. And I said, "Oh, you level off, John, give me 2 feet per second down." And he had a little switch, he could do that. And so we started down at 2 feet, and I wanted him to land with no forward velocity and no lateral velocity. Because when we hit, we wanted to hit and stick. We didn't want to skid, if you will.
Yeah.
And he did. We got 0 lateral and 0 forward, and we came straight down. And at 6 feet above the moon, the landing probes hit the moon. The light came on, said contact, and he shuts the engine down, and we drop in the last 3 feet.
Yeah. Can you recall?
And we were so excited.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We shouted, "Oh, Orion is finally here, Houston! Fantastic!" And we were congratulating one another, and of course you had procedures to do to make sure you didn't break anything when you landed. But we were really excited.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask. I was going to ask, what did you say when you first landed and when you first stepped on the moon?
Well, I can tell you what I said when I first landed. It was, "Oh, Orion is finally here, Houston. Fantastic!" And I hollered at Houston. And I don't remember what John said, but similar. And but I don't remember, the lunar module never had to have a speech when we were always second out. Mm-hmm. And so the commander had the little speech. Neil Armstrong had this little speech. And then Buzz Aldrin didn't say anything. He just jumped out. Well, that was my feeling. I just jumped out and started being ecstatic about, I'm on the moon. And you could see all these major landmarks around, and it was perfectly clear because there's no atmosphere on the moon, so you had no haze or anything like that. Just all the way to the horizon, all the way around, it was a sharp break between the lunar surface and the blackness of space.
Yeah.
And, so it was exciting being there. We recognized everything. We started talking about, that we can get over here, we can get there. And Houston, we got it made, basically, and we did. It was just tremendous.
And did you all set up the television camera pretty quickly?
It was stowed in the equipment bay outside. Mm-hmm. So first we deployed the rover, and that was easy to do. And once we got it on the ground, we just picked it up and carried it off. You can pick up your car on the moon. The rover only weighed 80 pounds up there. So I got on one side, John got on the other. We picked it up, took it out. He jumped in and powers up, drives around, and parks. And by this time, I'm getting the camera out, and the TV camera, which was stored outside in what was called the Mesa Modular Equipment Storage Assembly. And so I get the camera out, mount it on the rover, mm-hmm. plug it in, and we get the antenna pointed at the Earth, turn it on, and they picked up TV. And, So then they watched us as we planted the flag and did all the other little housekeeping things around the lunar module. I had to get the experiments off the back that we were going to deploy, and you had to get those about 100 meters out from the lunar module, because they didn't want to get them blown over when you lift it off. So you got them out there so it wouldn't be affected. And so we started deploying the experiments. That took about 4 hours. And so at the end of that, we got in the car and we drove west about 1.5 kilometers to this place called Plum Crater. There's no magnetic field on the moon, so your direction is the angle of the sun. And the shadows were always facing west, because the sun was always behind us. On a day on the moon from sunrise to sunset, it's 2 weeks. So and the sun was just coming up like early morning on the moon day. And by the time we left, it was still moon morning.
Yeah.
3 days later. And so we'd drive the car and face down sun, and we had a gyro, and we just rolled the gyro to 270 was at the top, and that was our direction.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you guys used, days, months, hours on the moon, when of course that's all based on, Earth.
Earth time, yeah.
Yeah, were you guys just using Central Time, like Houston time zone?
Houston time, yeah.
Yeah.
The flight plan was on GMT and Houston. You had but we didn't have outside. It was just how long you've been outside. So it was more EVA time that they were interested in than what time it was back on Earth or in Timbuktu.
What did the surface of the moon feel like? Is there anything on Earth that's at all comparable? Like, is it closer to walking on ice, walking on salt? Rock?
It's more fine-grained sand would be probably the best, I think. It was pulverized rock. There's no organic material on the moon. So the meteorites have hit and over the eons and pulverized the moon, and all this ejecta that comes out from the meteorite hitting, a lot of it's real fine grained, and it settles back down onto the moon. And so when you look at it on a microscope, it's very angular, like sand, but when you step on it, it has very good bearing strength because it locks up. So we never sank in more than about 1 to 2 inches as we walked. But I drilled 10 feet down and we brought that core, we called it, that core back, and it was still fine grained down 10 feet where I happened to drill. So but it had very good bearing strength, so you never sank in very much. We shoveled trenches and 3 feet deep, and it was still loose down there, at least in our landing area. Now, the last stop was up at North Ray Crater, and it was a big, fresh crater, and it was like walking on a hardwood floor. There was hardly any ejecta that was fine-grained up there because it had all been blasted away. And but generally where our landing area was mostly gray in color. Some rocks were shades of black, and some rocks were white. They'd been shattered and melted basically, and then reformed, and so they were white in color. But mostly it's just shades of gray, and but very exciting. Everywhere you go, you see something new, and it's look at that, John, and hey, let's go over there, but we had a flight plan, and we tried to obey the flight plan.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I mean, it was shot in black and white, of course, for the TV cameras, and that's the only footage we have now.
Yeah.
But it almost doesn't matter because it doesn't sound like there was a lot of color up there.
No,
right?
shades of gray.
Shades of gray.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and dark. If you're in the shadow, it was dark.
Yeah.
But you could see into the shadow, and because there was so much reflected light from down sun, you could get this reflected light into the shadows. So you're standing in shadow, but you can see some detail.
Yeah.
And down at the South Pole, it's going to be different. It's real dark shadows down there. So
Yeah.
Artemis has I think, going to have a challenge at the South Pole.
Yeah, we'll get into a little more of that later.
Yeah.
I think the imagery, it's, I guess, unfortunate that, I mean, well, I'm excited for the Artemis missions because it'll be, you know, in such high resolution and stuff, but it's unfortunate that the videos at the time weren't able to probably capture it as well as, you know, it was from your vision. Do you think a lot of people watching then in the 60s, they didn't believe it? Like they were watching the footage and they're just like, there's no way?
Well, nobody questioned it when we were doing it. After the flights were over, the conspiracy theories started. Well, we don't have the technology to do that. And look at the flags flying. And,
Yeah.
and there's no wind on the moon, and there's no stars in the sky, and it's black sky, and the sun's shining. Well, that's why there's no stars in the sky. The sun's shining. They're there, but you can't see them. I mean, now, with all the evidence from LRO photographs taken and seeing the lunar module in a car on the moon, and the radar the reflectors that we send, and they're bouncing signals off the thing. People are willfully ignorant if they don't believe that we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can see it now. You can see those things on the moon.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit, the LRO photographs? That's so interesting.
The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is in a satellite's in lunar orbit, pole to pole, and north to south, and it's got some cameras that are resolution down to, I think, less than 6 feet. So it's mapping the moon to that scale.
Mm-hmm.
So when it goes over Apollo, it says picture, 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 picture. And so they developed that picture, and you can see the car, you can see the descent stage, you can see the experiments package, and you see where we've walked. You can't see the individual footprints, but when you walk, the surface turns dark gray. And all of that's there on every Apollo landing site. And so the evidence is overwhelming, and so it's credulous that people don't believe it. I had a young man the other day. I'd spoken to a group, and after it was over, they were all attentive. And I asked him, I said, how many of, there were about 40 of them. I said, how many of you in here don't think we landed on the moon? His hand went up, one hand. And I said, why don't you believe it? He didn't have any reason. He just didn't believe it. He couldn't tell me a reason.
Yeah.
And if you look, I told NBC morning show, I forgot who it was, this is 20 years ago. I said, Katie, if we faked it, why did we fake it 9 times? We went to the moon 9 times. You're going to fake something, do it once and shut up. And 400,000 people working on Apollo, and the Russians in the race to us. And if we'd have faked it, the Russians would have let us. They would have flagged the whole world.
Yeah.
And they congratulated us instead of say you faked it. So it's crazy, but people are willfully ignorant.
Yeah. I think it's really admirable that you're able to sort of cordially respond to some of these sort of accusations that are obviously lies, because obviously it's, you know, your life's work.
Well, they're not really lying for sure.
I don't think they think they're lying.
No, they don't think they're lying. And so you just have to correct them and say, if you tell them the truth, and then they either believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's like the Bible. The Bible speaks the truth, and you can believe it or not.
Yeah. By the way, how are we doing on time? Are we all good?
Yeah,
How much
we're
more
good.
time? Okay, fantastic.
You got a lot of editing to do here.
Oh, we'll have a lot of editing, but the more we can get from you, the better. Like, we love it.
Nick to do the editing.
Yeah, we have someone. That's not our job, so
Okay.
yeah, he'll do it. But yeah, we'll get into a little bit more of those sort of theories later. But I have a couple more questions, a few more actually, about specifically the your time on the moon during the 3 days. Can we talk a little bit about the experiments that you guys did? What was in the experiments package?
The ones we deployed, we had a heat flow experiment. We had a magnetometer measuring any residual magnetism. We had 2 seismic experiments, one passive and one active, and one other that I don't remember, but there were 5 experiments. And unfortunately, John gets, they all came in and fed their data into what was called a central station, and each one had an electrical probe and a data probe, and John was working on a central station, and you can't see your feet in a Apollo spaceship, and he gets tangled up, and we'd warned him, said somebody's going to get tangled up in one of these cables.
Mm-hmm.
Sure enough, he did. He pulled it loose, and it was the power to my heat flow experiment. So we lost that experiment. I drilled one hole, and I was working on a second one when we just abandoned it. And,
Yeah.
so, but everything else worked. We also had a camera that was built by the Naval Observatory, and that was John's responsibility. He pointed it at, it took pictures in ultraviolet and infrared, and spectacular pictures of the bow wave of the Earth going through the magnetosphere, and to see the bow wave, and other stars and stuff like that they photographed. So it was a full experiments package. And on the rover, we had a portable magnetometer, we had a penetrometer that measured bearing strength, and shovels and rakes and stuff like that, bags for the rocks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We were busy.
Yeah, you guys collected 213 pounds of moon rocks, it says. What was the process for training for that on Earth, for getting all of those rocks? Over 3 days? I mean,
We
it's
had
heavy, right?
we had geology training 3 days every week. We'd go on some excursion, Arizona or Rockies or Hawaii or wherever,
Yeah.
and we would do these 3 days worth of experiments and learning how to collect different kind of rocks. So that went on for about 6 years until we flew, and then we had lectures from our geology team who said we want this kind of rock and this kind of rock, and they gave us some examples, and turned out they thought it was all volcanic, and it wasn't. So we started describing these rocks, and took them maybe about a half hour to get really excited, because they hadn't expected these rocks up there. And so we were bringing back these rocks, and the biggest one we brought back was on the first stop at Plum Crater. And the TV cam, I noticed the TV cam, as I was going around the crater to the rover, I noticed the TV camera pointed down at this rock. And they said, pick up that rock. So I walked over with my shovel. I said, this one? I said, yeah. I said, it's as big as a watermelon. You want to pick up a rock like that? Yeah, pick it up. Well, I couldn't bend over and with 2 hands and pick it up.
Yeah.
So I had to go around and down into the crater a little bit, down in on the downward side, and bend over and lean on the shovel, and with my right hand I rolled it up my leg, this rock. Mm-hmm. And I was cradling it like a little baby, and I hopped out, and I made a statement to Bill Mollberger, who was the chairman of the Geology Department, University of Texas, was chief of our experiments team and geology team. So I said, Mollberger, if I fall in this crater, you've had it. And So we ended up with this big rock, and it down here on Earth it weighed 20 pounds, by far the biggest rock ever brought back. And we named it Big Muley after him. So, that was the biggest sample that we brought. We didn't want to bring it back, but they said, yeah, we want it, so we brought it back.
Yeah. Where's that rock now?
Still in, not all of it's been examined. It's been sectioned now, and it's in the lunar, all of the samples that are still left are in the lunar receiving lab at Johnson Space Center in a nitrogen environment atmosphere. So,
Yeah.
so they're not changing any. And they give them out pieces every once in a while for people who have an experiment they want to do. And they'll ship you one if you're in Hawaii or wherever, you want to experiment. You write a proposal. If they accept your proposal, they'll send you a sample.
Yeah. Mattingly must have felt so left out.
Not really. He was really busy.
Okay.
You'd think the command module pilot would be disappointed, but at least you're going.
Yeah.
We had 42 astronauts, and only 24 of us went to the moon, and so 18 didn't even get to go. So to get a flight was really, really an honor, and it was special. And they were really busy. He had a whole suite of experiments that he was doing from orbit.
Yeah.
And 2 big cameras, and I don't remember all of the other experiments he was doing, but it was busy 3 days for him.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about how fast you are moving in space on your way to and from the moon? I think people don't realize just how fast the rocket went.
Well, to get in orbit, in lunar orbit, you got to go around 16,000, 17,000 miles an hour to overcome gravity and stay in orbit.
Mm-hmm.
So that speed is trying to throw you away from the Earth, but gravity is attracting you, so it's balanced, and so you stay in orbit. To accelerate out of orbit, you have to go 25,000 miles an hour to escape gravity and be on your way to the moon. And so then as you're going out to the moon, you slow down, but when you get there, you're still going too fast to go into lunar orbit, and you'd whip around and come back if you didn't burn. So you had a fuel budget, so you pointed the spacecraft in the direction you came from, and ignited the engine based on their time, and you went into orbit. And I think lunar orbit's maybe 6,000 miles. I don't remember exactly, but it's not nearly Earth orbit speed. And so it took us 2 hours, even though the moon is a lot smaller than the Earth, diameter-wise, it takes longer to go around because you're not going nearly as fast. So we went into orbit at about 175 miles above the moon, and we slowly lowered that altitude down so that we were 60 miles on the far side of the moon and 8 miles on the front side of the moon. And from the 8 mile point was where we were going to start our descent.
Yeah. For you and John on the moon, how did you guys handle sleeping? Did you guys take shifts, or did you sleep at the same time?
We slept at the same time, and so you got gravity, you got 1/6 gravity. We took off our suits, and underneath the suit we had a liquid cool garment that I found it chilly inside the spacecraft, so I kept that on. John had other stuff, and we had 2 hammocks, and my hammock went from right to left and about 6 inches off the floor. His was about 3 feet off the floor, and his went from back to front. And we hooked those hammocks up, and we just climbed in the hammock, and it was very comfortable, really.
Yeah.
So we slept in a hammock for first night. You're so excited, you didn't get much sleep, but
Right.
After that, 8 hours in a spacesuit was really a workout. you're exhausted.
Yeah.
Hands are cramped, and you know, forearms, and you're just glad to be out of that spacesuit and go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about the rocks and the composition? Because I know I talked about it a little bit earlier, but the scientists thought that there was volcanic activity somewhere on the moon, or that there could have been at some point, and the rocks sort of disproved that.
Yes, they did, and I don't remember they were mostly what was called breccias, which is a matrix and inclusions in that matrix, and the matrix was generally light colored, and the inclusions were dark, and those were volcanic, but the matrix was not. And I want to say igneous rock, but I'm not sure. I've never really. I don't remember now, 50 years later,
Yeah.
exactly what the term.
The rocks aren't the part that necessarily sticks with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Makes sense. As you were leaving, you left a photo of your family on the moon, as well as your U.S. Air Force medal. And you were the only astronaut in your group to leave a photo of your family and do those things. I'm curious why you chose to do that.
Well, our families lived in Houston, and we trained in Florida. So the whole week of training, you go to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd leave either Sunday afternoon or early Monday morning and come back usually Friday afternoon, get home time for supper. So the family's being raised by your wife, and you see the kids just, you know, weekends and stuff like that. And so our kids were, I started training, Tom was 3 and Charles was 5. And so to get them excited, we'd taken them down to the Cape. We got permission, and they let them go up the elevator and the Saturn beside the Saturn V, and
Wow.
look into the spacecraft and look around all of the launch pad and stuff. So they were really excited about that. So I said, well, boys, how about let's go to the moon as a family? And they got very excited. I said, well, of course we can't do it for real,
Mm-hmm.
but we can take a photograph, and in that photograph we can go to the moon together. So they thought that was a great idea. So we had a guy named Ludi Benjamin, who's a photographer for NASA, a friend of mine. He came over in our backyard and took this little snapshot.
Mm-hmm.
And I got permission to take it with me. And that's probably the last thing I did, except try the high jump record, and which was disaster.
Yeah.
But anyway, on last EVA, I stuck the picture in my suit pocket right here. And so I got to a place that was undisturbed, and I took it out and dropped it onto the lunar surface and took a picture of the picture. On the backside, we'd written, "This is the family of astronaut Charlie Duke from planet Earth, who landed on the moon in April 1972, and we all signed it." So,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's amazing.
didn't last very long. Temperature was 115 degrees centigrade at that. 115 Fahrenheit, I think, at that time. So the little plastic started shriveling up, but I got it picture taken before it just shriveled all up.
Yeah. What is the temperature up there usually? Obviously, it
Well,
varies.
when we landed, it was 80 average. There's no air because there's no atmosphere, but the surface heats up. The sun heats up the surface, and generally the average when we landed was about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. When we left, it was 250.
Oh, that's quite the difference.
Yeah, and if you stay all day, the temperature gets up to around 400.
Wow.
Yeah, 350, 400.
Would your suits have been able to handle that?
No, they were limited at 250.
Okay.
So the things get soft in the plastic, and and you didn't feel that though. The problem in a spacesuit is body heat. You've got to get rid of the body heat, or you're going to have heat stroke in that suit.
Yeah.
So cooling system, the liquid cooled garment pumped water through this suit, this inside underwear, and picked up the body heat and took it to the backpack, and there was a instrument called not an instrument, but a contraption called a sublimator, and you expose the water and the heat to the atmosphere, and it just flashed off into space.
Yeah. I heard that you also brought country music to the moon.
Yes, I did. Everybody had a 2-hour tape, and so Pete Conrad had taken, he was a country music fan, and Stu Russo was a country music fan on Apollo 14, and so we all had a friend as a disc jockey at KIKK in Pasadena, Texas. His name was Bill Bailey. So I called up Bill. I said, Bill, I need some country music for the moon. He said, you got it, baby. So about 2 weeks before the liftoff, I get these 2 tapes. He gives me these 2 tapes. And I took them to NASA, and he said, don't listen to them till you get airborne. So I took them to NASA. They had to put them on their official tape.
Yeah.
So, and we had a little tape recorder on board, and so we get airborne, and on our way to the moon, I pulled out one of these cassettes and I plugged it in, and it was, "Hi Charlie, this is Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton, and thank you for taking us to the moon." And they had a whole half-hour show just for us. They recorded just for us. And it was live. And then the next half hour was, "Hi Charlie, this is Merle Haggard." And Merle Haggard had a half hour.
Yeah.
And then and they were all singing songs that were popular in the 70s. You know? And then the third half hour was Buck Owens. And the last half hour was Chet Atkins and Jerry Reed. And all 4 of them groups did a special program just for us. And so when I got back, I gave them some souvenirs, but I gave the originals to Country Music Hall of Fame, and now I've got them on CDs. The whole thing's on CDs.
Yeah.
And my neighbor in New Braunfels, where we were living, about 2 or 3 years ago, he's a country music star. He's named Randy Rogers, and so he listens to these tapes. He said, "Charlie, can I write a song about this?" So I said, "Yeah, sure." So he calls me back about 2 days later and said, "Charlie, come over here and listen to this song." Well, they were doing he and Robert Earl Keen were doing an album, and so they wrote this song. Charlie Duke took country music to the moon. He blasted off and lifted off with Dolly Rose, and all the names of these people on this.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty popular song, and listening to these programs as we flew to the moon and came home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Out of pure curiosity, if you could bring any song to the moon now, any artist, who would it be?
Probably Willie Nelson. He was a friend of ours too, and he's an icon. I met him through Darrell Royal, who was a famous football coach at the University of Texas in the 50s, early 60s. And Willie has a number of real hits that I like, and he did a album with Merle Haggard. No, not Merle. Yeah, I think it was Merle. Anyway, I got all his CDs.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go back to some of those dumb, moon landing conspiracy theories that a lot of people have. So this is one we already sort of discussed a little bit earlier, which is the no stars one. So I have this clip. What would be the best way to do this? You want to just put this in your lap real quick?
Yeah.
All right. This is a moon landing denier. We'll just click play.
I've looked into the footage. There's no stars in the background. Yeah. And the cameras they're using, it seems kind of odd that at least there's literally no sources of light outside of what's directly in front of them.
All right. So do you want to explain why that's not true?
Well, it's not true because the sun's shining. You're on the moon, and the brightness of the lunar surface is really overwhelming. So you had 2 sun visors on, and the sun is shining all the time when you're on the moon. And you look up, and just like daylight here, you look up right now, I'm looking out my window and I see blue sky, the sun shining. There's stars out there, but I can't see them because of the sun shining.
Right.
Same on the moon. The sky's black like night, but it's not black on the moon. It's black because there's no atmosphere. And without any atmosphere, the sky's black on the moon, but the sun's shining, so you don't see any stars.
Right, right. Out of pure curiosity, like when you're landing on the moon, obviously like when you're far enough away from the moon, you can still see the stars. As you get closer and closer,
no, you can't see whenever the sun's shining, you don't see any stars.
In space.
In space.
Wow.
So all the way to the moon, unless you're looking at a telescope that will capture the light, you see some stars. But looking out the window, you do not see, the only objects you see are the sun, the moon, and the earth.
Wow.
It's black.
So only because at night on Earth you're facing away from the sun,
Yeah.
you can see the stars. But when you're in the spacecraft, you're always in direct sunlight, so you cannot see the stars.
Yeah.
Wow.
All the way to the moon, you're in direct sunlight.
Right.
Okay. When you get to the moon and you go behind the moon and the night on the moon, you look out and you can see the stars. But if it's day on the moon,
Right.
and you're standing there, you look up and it's black because there's no atmosphere. But it's the sun shining, so you can't see the stars.
Yeah. I'm really glad you explained that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people didn't really realize that. So that's a good one.
Okay.
All right, let me pull up the next one here. That's really helpful, I think. Yeah.
I think
Am I missing
just,
something?
No, you're not. I think just these two would be the next best because
Yeah.
the other ones he's already kind of touched on.
Yep.
So I don't want.
All right, I'm gonna warn you. This guy's a little crazy, but this one's about basically the fuel, how much fuel you would need to get to the moon, essentially. All right, he's a little crazy. I'll be honest.
He's a lot.
He's a lot crazy. All right, here we go.
How much fuel exactly? This is a new one for me. Like some engineer did the math, and like it just doesn't add up. They should have a lot more fuel. If they're gonna go all the way to the moon, it just doesn't add up. They should have way more fuel.
Okay.
The fuel budget, we had limited fuel on these spacecraft, but the trajectory was designed to get to the moon with mostly all your fuel. You had enough fuel to go into lunar orbit to slow down. Going to the moon, you don't burn any fuel.
Right.
You're just going. You burn the velocity to get to the moon is supplied by the rocket. Okay, and it accelerates you to 25,000 miles an hour and you escape Earth gravity. But as you go to the moon, gravity's slowing you down. So when you get to the moon, you're going probably 6,000 miles an hour or thereabouts, and you have to slow, but that's too fast to go into orbit around the moon. So you have this fuel on board the command module, service module, and you light the big engine and you point it away from you're going this way, your engine's firing you this way, and you slow down and you go into lunar orbit at about 170 miles. And that fuel budget, the trajectory was designed because you had only limited fuel in the service module. And so it was designed such that they shot you out in front of the moon and it took you 72 hours to get there. If they just fired you right towards the moon, you got there in 12 hours. But you're going so fast, you don't have enough fuel to slow down. So, and then get out of orbit. So they fire you way out in front, so Earth slows you down. Then when you get started getting to lunar gravity, which is about 212,000 miles, you start to accelerate, but you're not going too fast that you can't slow down with the fuel you have on board. All this was designed, planned out.
Right.
you had a fuel budget, so how long can it take you to get to the moon and you still slow down? And then get out of orbit and come home.
Right.
Okay? And that was all planned. And you had a certain amount of fuel, but the 72 hours to the moon, then to slow down into orbit, use some to maneuver in orbit, and then enough fuel to get you back.
Yeah.
And out of orbit. And so it was planned because you had a limited amount of fuel. So they knew how much fuel it would take if you got there after 72 hours.
Right.
I mean, it's all planned. It's just orbital mechanics.
Yeah. So I think what maybe some people, especially younger people, may not realize is that once you have enough fuel to get you going, right, Earth's gravity will slow you down a little bit until you start accelerating again as you get closer to the moon.
Yeah.
But the rockets aren't going during the 3-day trip to the moon. There's no drag in space.
No.
You're just floating.
Well, you're
flying.
Flying,
Yeah.
towards the moon.
Right.
With
It's not like a boat where when you turn on the motor and then you turn it off, eventually it's just going to stop.
No.
There's no drag.
No
you
drag.
know? Yeah, so I think that's something that maybe people can't comprehend for some reason. All right, I got one more for you. For this one, this is about the space suits. So it'd be cool, actually, maybe you could even use the glove as a demonstration after I show you this one. All right, here you go.
I don't believe there's any way those spacesuits could compensate for hundreds of degrees difference temperature for those astronauts. When you look at that technology, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it.
Okay. Well, what do you think?
Well, first off, the suits were designed. We'd realized how hot it was on the
Right.
moon. But the problem in a space set, it's easy to insulate a spacesuit to keep the sun's heat out.
Yeah.
But what's the problem in a spacesuit is the body heat. You're in this little refrigerator working like crazy, and
Yeah.
you got to get rid of the body heat. The body, without the cooling garment we had underneath the suit, you would have heat stroke in about 30 minutes to an hour
Yeah.
working on the lunar surface. So we had what we called a liquid cool garment that we wore underneath the suit. And it was like a long underwear that had little plastic tubes woven through the fabric, down your legs, up around your torso, down your arms, and they were all filled with water.
Wow. Okay.
And they all came together in a manifold right on your stomach. And you plugged that into the inside of the suit. Then you took another hose and you plugged it into the front side of the suit. And once you got zipped up, you could turn on a little pump. And it pumped water through these tubes.
Yeah.
Filled. It's like your car radiator.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How hot did it feel in there?
Well, it got really hot we used to train at the Cape without any cooling. Mm-hmm. And you were saturated with sweat after 3 hours. You could take off your suit and pour out a quart of water.
Yeah.
Take your glove off and pour out the water because we didn't have any cooling inside the suit. The body heat kills you, not the sun's heat, because the suit is protected. This is a cover of a spacesuit glove, and it's made so that it's not going to be abraded away and will hold the pressure. And this is, of course, a model, so you can't bend it, but we had enough water in our backpack to last 8 to 9 hours. And then generally after 8 or 9 hours, you're going to use up most of that water. And if you got to the end of that tank, you had a reserve for about another 30 minutes. So the whole idea was to pick up the body heat through this radiator system that was a pair of a long underwear, and take it to the backpack where there was an instrument back on the backpack called a sublimator. And you push this water through the sublimator, and it was exposed to vacuum, and it all went off into space. the water and the heat.
Yeah.
And that thing would freeze you if you worked to maximum. Sitting in the car, if you didn't go to minimum, you were going to be ice.
Yeah.
Inside, not heat,
Right.
but ice, because it was removing the heat so fast. It was like being in a refrigerator.
Yeah. I'm going to do one more. Bella, can you, just so that we have a shot from behind, if you just, because I was trying to get my phone a little bit earlier.
Oh, sure. And that's the last video, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sort of like just stand behind him and just like get a sort of an above shot. So this is the last one. This isn't really a debunk as much as it is more of another question that somebody had about why we haven't gone back to them in 50 years. Obviously, we're about to go back, but why we haven't gone back and why other countries haven't gone back. So he didn't show his face for whatever reason, but here's the video. Are you recording? Mm-hmm. All right, perfect.
Why haven't we got to the moon after 1972? It doesn't make sense because there are a lot of people, a lot of billionaires, a lot of rich countries, especially here in the Middle East, that are ready to invest to be the second country or the second nation to reach the moon.
Yeah, so that's the last question.
Well, the question can be answered very simply. When Apollo was so successful that they canceled the last 3 missions,
Yeah.
18, 19, and 20. So they canceled the missions because of the success of Apollo, plus they wanted to start building the space shuttle.
Right.
And that took all the NASA budget, the space shuttle. And it was the shuttle. First they had Skylab, which was a Earth orbit laboratory. And they had enough money for that, but then it started, so that was over, and then the shuttle came along. It took 4 or 5 years to develop the space shuttle, but all the money for spaceflight was spent on the space shuttle, and they didn't have any extra money, and they just finished this most successful program, so why go back to the moon? Well, the shuttle lasted for 20-something years. It first flew in '81, and it was still flying, and then right after that, they went to the space station to make a science laboratory in Earth orbit, which was all the nations of the world participated. All that took all the money that NASA had.
Yeah.
Under President Bush, the second president of Bush, in 2012, I think it was, right around that time frame, no, maybe earlier than that, he started the Artemis program. And the Artemis program was a return to the moon. And so as soon as we got, that money was appropriated, and we were off to the moon again. But when Obama came in, Obama canceled it. He wasn't a big, it's my opinion, he wasn't a big space fan. So he canceled it. And so now we're flying space shuttle and going to space station, but we don't have a spacecraft, so we go to the space station on the Russians, with the Russians. We pay the Russians to send our astronauts to the moon. So without Artemis, we don't have any program, and none of the other nations were building a program except maybe the Chinese. There have been people that have landed on the moon, but not with people. The Chinese, the Indians, and several others. And we've landed stuff on the moon. And we've been to Mars with unmanned. But that takes money, and then so all of this has been a 50-year, it's 55 years since the first landing on the moon, coming up this summer. And so now the money is being appropriated for Artemis, and with the SpaceX's and others like that pitching in, we got enough money to go. And so that's why it's been 50 years, because all the money went into these other programs. We decided about the Moon Olympics. If you think about it, every Apollo flight on the moon had something that was closed out, if you will. Apollo 14, I'll just talk about two. Apollo 14, Alan Shepard hit a golf ball up on the moon. That was his closeout act. Apollo 15, Dave Scott had a hammer and a feather, and he dropped them. They both hit the ground at the same time. That doesn't happen down here, but
Right.
it does up there because there's no atmosphere. And so the feather doesn't float down, it just
Right.
goes straight down. So we were thinking about, what do we do? And turns out that 1972, the Summer Olympics were in Munich in August, July, whenever it was. So we were going to do the Moon Olympics. And we were decided we would do the high jump and maybe the broad jump. How far you could jump, how high you could jump.
Uh-huh.
And so that was our plan. Unfortunately, we never practiced it in the zero-G airplane. And I've learned a big lesson from that. Never do anything in space you hadn't practiced down here. So anyway, we start to bounce. And my backpack or the life support system weighed as much as I did. So astronauts walked with bent over to keep your center of gravity over your feet. So as I was bouncing, and then I gave a jump, and when I did, I straightened up. Well, my center of gravity went backwards, and over I went. And that was the only time in the whole flight I had fear. But fear is not a bad emotion if you don't panic. So I'm going over backwards, and the thought occurred, roll right. And I rolled to the right, and I broke my fall on my right hand and my right leg. Bounced onto my back, and I'm flat on my back, and there's the Earth right up there, and my heart's pounding, but I'm still alive. And I looked at my pressure gauge, it said normal. Pumps were pumping, and I said, I think I'm okay. And John Young came over and looked down and says, that wasn't very smart, Charlie. I said, I know, John, help me up. And so he helped me up, and my heart was pounding, but I'm still alive. And the TV, I looked up, and the TV camera was pointed right at me, and Mission Control has seen this high jump record, but they didn't like it. They said, that's no more Olympics, guys.
Didn't get to do the broad jump?
No, we didn't get to do it. They canceled the Moon Olympics.
Oh, man.
And I'm thankful they did, because that's why I say never do anything in space you hadn't practiced down here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That footage is probably all available, right? Like the television footage?
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So we'll definitely insert some of that.
But the television on one side of the car, I'm on the back side, and when I jump, you see me jump and fall over backwards, but I disappear behind the car.
Mm.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about getting sick with the flu right before the mission?
Well, it was the flu. No, it was right before my mission. I was pneumonia.
Oh.
I caught the flu on a geology trip in December over in Hawaii, and I really didn't take care of myself. I was finished our training, and I just stayed in the office, and we worked and had holiday, and so it was early January when I flew to the Cape, Kennedy Space Center, for a week of training. And I got there and I was feeling awful. I went to stand in the Holiday Inn, and the next morning I woke up, I couldn't get out of bed. And so I called NASA. I said, y'all come get me, take me to the doctor. I said, it's really bad. So he took me to the NASA doctor out at Kennedy, and he looked at me and said, your lungs sound terrible. You got pneumonia. I'm sending you to the hospital. They put me in an ambulance and took me to Patrick Air Force Base Hospital, and I stayed in there a week, but recovered. I was in good shape, but I just had developed pneumonia. So I was there about a week, and while I was there, our spacecraft was on the launch pad, and somebody made a mistake, and they had to take the spacecraft and roll it back into the VAB. Well, that delayed our launch for a whole month, from March until April, and that gave me another month to get back in shape. And so I never got so close to launch with that pneumonia that it was going to affect my flying.
Good. Yeah. I have a couple more fun ones. So, in our lifetimes, at some point, there may be an opportunity for a lot of people to get to go to the moon, right? I mean, I certainly hope maybe in 50 or 60 years, it will be possible for civilians to go. If I'm ever given the opportunity to go to the moon, do you recommend it?
Yeah, I think civilian space flight's going to become very popular. I was just in SpaceX talking to the civilian crew that is going to fly the Dragon spacecraft, and they're going to be in Earth orbit, but it's 4 of them, and they paid their way. There have been a lot of people paid their way to Mir Space Station and to the space station. The head of the Explorers Club in New York, he paid his way, and so it's going to get cheaper and cheaper. And I think eventually you'll see people going excursions in a spacecraft to the moon. Now I'm not sure you'll get to land, but at least you'll be out there, and I see a big future for civilian space flight and people paying their way, and the price will come back down. And it's expensive now, but people are paying. You can fly Blue Origin straight up into space and straight back down. Now, I don't know how much they charge you, but people are paying their way. And SpaceX I met a fellow that has bought 4 missions on SpaceX, and so talked to them, and they're very excited. So people are going. It's expensive right now, but as the civilian market opens up and companies like SpaceX start building more and more rockets, the price will come back down.
Yeah.
So stand by. You're at right age.
Hopefully. This one's a fun one as well. There's not that many people, obviously, alive today that went to the moon. So you're one of the people on this planet that has gone the farthest away from Earth. Now, I don't know if that necessarily qualifies you for this question, but I feel like you're more qualified than almost anybody else in the world to answer this. Do you feel that there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe? No.
No. I'm a Christian, and I've read the Bible through and through, and there's no indication that there is intelligent human life outside of the universe, outside of the earth. God, I'm a creationist. I believe that God created the earth and all the universe, and he never once speaks about life out there. There's spiritual life. There's angels and demons, but it's in a realm that we can't see. Now, I do believe in those objects because I've seen the effect of those kind of life in Earth, but as far as the little Martians or little Lilliputians or whatever there is out there, the Bible's silent about it, and there is no evidence that there is. So there's a lot of speculation, but I believe Scripture. When I put the Bible into my life and started reading the Bible, and it's called I call it the manufacturer's home handbook. He made us. He gave us a plan, and if you put your life in order, in this order, things happen. But he doesn't ever mention other life out in deep space. There's 2 scriptures that when I became a believer in 1975, no, 1978, my wife became 75. I started reading the Bible, and then I can't tell you where it is in the Bible, but it says, when God made the earth, he suspended it upon nothing. That's exactly what it looks like from space. There it is, just hung out in space. And then and then the other verse, it says, God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. If you believe in a flat earth, all you got to do is look at the pictures that we took. It's not flat. It's a sphere. It's
Yeah.
a sphere.
So
The
that's
circle, it looks like a circle.
Yeah.
It's there it is, just suspended out there in the blackness of space. And all the other planets the same way.
Yeah.
All the pictures, they're all spheres. And that's gravity. Gravity just gonna pull things together and it's not flat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we did a video with flat earthers once.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty crazy.
yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I just don't. Hopefully, anyone who sees this video now will not have any more questions.
Yeah, we're hoping that that section you did with the laptop too debunks all the myths and stuff.
Well, I say people are willfully ignorant. If you think about it, there's no way to fake it. The TVs that we sent back and the photographs of the LRO and the lunar, the reflectors that we left on the moon, and they beaming, bouncing signals off of those, and you know, you could put them up there without people, but
Yeah.
they were. And just look.
Yeah.
It's like the
And-
evidence is all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.